Hello, everybody at
Hello.
home. My name is Nicole Yackley, and I'm the manager of the indie bookstore Read It Again in Swanee, Georgia. I am joined today by A K Larkwood from all the way in the UK to discuss her book, The Unspoken Name, copies of which are available for purchase in our store, and you can see the beautiful cover right there. And you can buy it also on our website. Links will be in the comments. AK studied English at St. John's College in Cambridge, and since then she has worked in higher education and media relations and is now studying law. She lives in Oxford, England with her wife and a cat. Her debut novel, The Unspoken Name, was published by Tor in February, and I believe the sequel is set to come out next June. That's exciting.
Sure is.
AK, for those of us, or for those who haven't read it yet, I've read it. Could you describe your book for us?
See, I'm supposed to be really good at doing this, and I've rehearsed it so many times, but as soon as anyone asks me what the book is about, it instantly goes out of my head. It is the story of an orc priestess who is supposed to be human sacrificed, or rather orcish sacrificed, I suppose, to the god, the Unspoken Name. And she has been brought up all her life expecting that this is what's going to happen to her, and she thinks that she's basically okay with it. And then on the fateful day when it's actually supposed to happen, she has the opportunity to make another choice and ends up leaving with a mysterious, charismatic wizard to become his servant, and is completely committed to him because of having been offered a new choice in life, and things play out from there. Is more or less how I would summarize it, but that's why I'm not a copywriter.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good summary, especially for not giving anything away, because all of that happens pretty soon in, so it's no spoilers yet. But yeah, that's how I describe it too, I think. But it's really good. I enjoyed it a lot. I finished it about an hour and a half ago.
Oh, I'm so glad. Amazing.
It was delightful. One of the first things that you encounter when you read your book, you open it up, there's the map, there's the cast of characters, and then there's a pronunciation guide. Do you want to talk about how you created the different languages or things like that?
So I always worry a bit about the pronunciation guide. I hope people don't find it intimidating, because I always think that if you open it up to it's 2 or 3 pages long, people are going to be like, oh, I suppose there's going to be a short test on phonetics at the end of this book to see whether I got it right. And if you read the book and the pronunciation guide did not match up to what you thought it should be, and or you were just like, I'm not going to read this, it doesn't matter, that's fine. I'm perfectly happy with that. I'm not really bothered by it, but I thought it was good to include in case people kind of were baffled by the strange names, because unfortunately I love a weird consonant cluster. But for the languages, I think that J.R.R. Tolkien referred to coming up with imaginary languages as like a secret vice, or a something equivalently kind of embarrassing. And basically that is how I feel about it, because in every book that I write, I always kind of want to write a bit where the characters start talking about kind of the exciting linguistics of their world. I'm like, no, normal people don't do that. It's not allowed to be in the book. There's not allowed to be a single joke about an interesting use of participles. Definitely not happening. So I do really like coming up with fake languages, and especially kind of different weird phonetics, because I always think it's nice when in a fantasy book the author has clearly paid some attention to kind of differentiating the names in the different cultures from each other, so that you kind of have if there are 2 or 3 different main societies, which there are in this book, it's kind of helpful for the reader for the names to have a distinctly different feel from each other. So I wanted to make sure to do that. It's kind of easier to do that consistently if you come up with some rules. And so I was kind of that's how I fell down the dark path of learning about different types of consonants and stuff. So I guess for this book, I kind of used a combination of writing some rules for generating it, and then also just kind of coming up with them and fudging them myself. So it's not actually always consistent, because some of them I came up with before, and I was like, I'm going to make these fit into the rules somehow. So yeah, that's kind of where the names in the pronunciation guide came from.
Right, that's cool. Yeah, I feel like there are normal people who would discuss participles on a daily basis, but they're not really your main characters here.
No, the ones who stay at home and write the books.
Right.
I would never go on a sort of
maybe Shoothmealy would discuss linguistics.
Actually, that's true. And also very much she would be the character where I would have to not include a conversation where she tries to talk about it. Nice.
But yeah, Csorwe would not get into that. But yeah, even without the pronunciation guide, like in text, you tell us how to pronounce Csorwe's name, like rhymes with doorway, with the KS of the giving sound. So don't be intimidated by the pronunciation guide, is the point of that.
Yes.
Yes.
It's also there because I like books which have a bit of preamble at the beginning. Also with the list of characters, that's a very good procrastination for me when I don't feel like actually working on the book. It's like, I'm going to go and fiddle with the list of characters and rearrange them, put them in a different order. Maybe someone has a middle name. And also I like the idea of having like the menu at the beginning of the book where you're kind of like, here are all these excitements to come. Although on the other hand, I have many nice friends who are just kind of like, map, dramatis personae, just skip past it. I want to get to the good stuff immediately. So
yeah. I mean, and they're there for the people who want them, and the people who want to read the book first and then revisit them can do that. Like, you have that option when you're reading a book. But I think it's good that you included them. So you mentioned coming up with it as a form of procrastinating, and I know people sometimes do world building sort of as a way of procrastinating writing too. Did you do a lot of world building that didn't make it into the page?
I did, but not kind of as a distraction, mostly because it took a very long time to write this book, and I kind of wrote a lot of different blind alleys that didn't end up getting used, or kind of I don't world build very systematically and tend to just kind of like, if I think of a cool thing to be in the book, I'll be like, yeah, now the rules cover this as well. This can happen all the time. And so I would have a cool image. Like I wanted to have, there was one bit that was cut that I really enjoyed where it was like, so if you haven't read it, in the book, there are these like interplanetary or interdimensional gates, which are these huge glowing green portals. And I had this idea that there was kind of like sinister excavations going on, and because someone was trying to uncover one of these that was underground and had been like buried and unknown for a really long time. And that then they were reactivating it because they wanted to get into some kind of like sinister territory. And that entire plotline ended up being cut. But I was basically born out of just having this vision of this kind of like this huge green gate, like kind of eye-opening underground. I thought it was very cool. But sadly, there was nothing to do with it. So yes, there is a lot of stuff that didn't make it in, but kind of not because I was working on it very systematically, just because I always have a lot of ideas and there's not always a place for them. But maybe in a future book, I shouldn't give it away. Might be crucial in book 3, I suppose.
That's true. Maybe the gate will make a reappearance. So you mentioned that you had this vision of like an eye-opening underground that was very cool. Did you have like, was there one image seed that like started this whole story or something like that? Like, what was your first seed that opened the portal to this world for you?
I guess kind of the obvious one is sort of the image of Csorwe with her like bowl of calf's blood, like walking up the steps to the shrine. That was very kind of clear in my head. I feel like I could draw it, like obviously kind of imagine this like cinematic opening sequence. I feel like that would be the first thing that you would see. And that kind of image is very crucial in the rest of the book. But I think actually the first kind of visual that I had of it did not ever make it into the book in the first place, which was I kind of had the whole idea for it when I was ill. So I'd gone back to my parents' house to recuperate from having very bad tonsillitis. And there was a whole bit where they had friends over for a party, and I was lying in this like swing seat outside with the like curtains of it down because I was just kind of like lying being ill. And I remember listening to people talking outside and me being kind of hidden away and kind of thinking about like, well, this would be a good way for an assassin to hide out, observing but not really being part of it. And I think that was kind of where I got the idea of wanting to write this character who was kind of, she's kind of part of things but not really part of things, and always kind of observing and doesn't really know what her place in life is. I suppose that's where that came from.
I assumed when you started talking about tonsillitis that you would go with the with the tusk getting torn.
I did also get one of my molars pulled out a long time ago, and it was very horrible. So that I mean, I had anesthetic and it was still pretty bad. And then I immediately had to go on a 3-hour train journey, which I will note she doesn't have to do in the book. But yes.
That's funny. There's an audience question from Gideon Marcus, who's also an author, and he says, congratulations on your debut novel. Was this your first big effort, or are there other novels that came before it that are waiting to see the light of day?
Well, I don't know about waiting to see the light of day because I strongly feel that none of these should ever be read by anyone. I wrote, so when I was at university and a bit afterwards, I spent a lot of time, I was very sad and didn't really enjoy university very much. So I spent pretty much the entire time writing a very long book about werewolves that was like fantasy werewolves, not like the standard werewolves. It was a whole royal family that were all werewolves because they were under a curse. It was probably about 200,000 words long. It was bananas. I don't recommend that anyone should read it. I do still have it all, and I may well use some bits of it again sometime, but as a whole, not great. And then before that, I was obviously throughout my teen years writing a very long book about vampires. So I've been just kind of progressing through the undead creatures. So in the Unspoken Name, there's a lot of skeletons, and then I'm eventually going to exhaust them, but we'll see. And I don't think anyone should read the vampire book either because it was extremely awful. And also I was like 17. So it was both awful and also very like dark and edgy because I thought, it was kind of like so many murders. Everyone has the saddest backstory. So yeah, I have a lot of ideas for the future and lots of things that I've written like 10,000 words of and never gone anywhere with. But in terms of actual finished things, there's nothing that anyone should ever read.
So we went through vampires and then werewolves, and then we had like the revenants, the like zombie characters in this one, among other things. That's very cool. So you mentioned that you saw that opening scene of her bringing the bowl of blood as like very cinematic, and I did feel that like this whole book, elements of it were like very cinematic. What would you most want to see like played out on the screen or in art form or something like that?
I guess kind of part of why that is that I have always been kind of sort of had a hobby of doing some kind of visual art thing. So that's why I've been studying and also writing a lot. So I haven't been drawing or painting as much as I would have liked to. But I still envision things in my head. I think definitely that first scene, just because it's so clear to me, the kind of the forest below and the mountain rising up and her kind of walking up the steps and just kind of, I feel like I can see all the details of it. But I also, the various different flying machines and flying ships, I think, they don't get a whole lot of description in the book because I sort of thought people don't really want their reading experience interrupted by me going on at length about like all the different propellers and stuff. Also because I don't know what any of those things do. But I kind of imagine it as being like, for instance, in the Studio Ghibli Howl's Moving Castle, there are all those kind of like incredible, like monstrous flying machines and different flying ships and different kind of vehicles that sort of have an identity of their own, which I really enjoy. So I would love to see someone's take on that. And in fact, someone did do a very cool painting of one of the maze ships, which I think I linked to on Twitter a while ago. Yes, it should be on there, which I liked very much. That was very gratifying.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the scene, I guess, where they go to get the map and they're at that, the like port city where it's like built layers and layers upon itself. I was like, that would be really cool to see like on the screen. But yeah, speaking of Howl's Moving Castle, like I was definitely getting some Howl vibes from this. I enjoyed this a lot. Are there any other books that you think maybe potentially influenced this story or that you read growing up that seeped their way in?
So I guess the kind of main obvious one, which I think is even on the cover, I think in Arcady's blurb is mentioned, but The Tombs of Aturan by Ursula Le Guin was like one of my favorite books when I was little because it's about this girl who's like the priestess of a dark god or dark gods, and she has this domain which is this kind of underground crypts that are, you can only navigate them in the dark, and she's the only person who's allowed to go down there. And when I was like 10, I didn't really understand the book, but I was like, this sounds great. I would love to have an evil cellar all to myself. And then I reread them kind of around the time I started writing the book and was just amazed by all of it and very kind of taken with the central conflict of that book, which is kind of, will she stick to the faith and community that she's been brought up in, even though it's kind of like completely overriding any personality that she might have, and this kind of destiny is like swallowing her up, or will she make another choice? And so that's kind of that's quite glossed over at the beginning of my book, but that was sort of the initial conflict I was interested in.
Yeah, and we do see that conflict played out with multiple characters. Like with Shukmili and also Urana, sorry.
Truly does not matter. No, it's
I
fine.
read the pronunciation guide, I promise.
No, but we have different accents anyway, so it really doesn't matter. Yeah, and I mean, I kind of interested in that theme of sort of, I feel like kind of like duty can feel quite played out as like a sci-fi and fantasy theme because people are kind of like, well, that's not relevant to my life. But actually, I think everyone does have a sense of what they should be doing with their lives, or kind of what they feel like they owe to very different people, or have different kind of demands put on them in certain ways. So, you know, I think it's kind of, there's a lot to get into there.
Yeah, and you do with the various characters. I like that. So speaking of, besides visual, I could also, when I first met Tal, I heard Griffin McElroy's head, voice in my head, if you know who that is.
Yes. But also now I'm dying.
Like the entire time throughout, he's a podcaster and does like the Adventure Zone. But the entire time for Tal, I was just hearing Griffin McElroy, and it was fantastic.
I mean, that's certainly I'm slightly overcome by this. I mean, that's for sure an interpretation that I've never thought of.
Were there any voices that you were thinking of when you were writing them?
Also, I definitely don't mean to be like, this is invalid, because by all means, he can be Griffin McElroy if that is what we decide. I guess with Tal, he kind of, also the other thing is that kind of, it's the characters all exist for me in a weird space where they're kind of English because that's like the default voice that I have going on, but also kind of not, because lots of my friends are Americans and I kind of talk to people on the internet, especially kind of like through lockdown and stuff, you know, I talk to people in various Slacks and group chats and stuff, you know, more than I ever get to see anyone in real life anymore. So the kind of the voice in my head, I feel like there's an English accent, but I get to hear people from all different places. So it's always kind of hard to pick what accent the characters should actually have. With Tal, the voice that the audiobook version of the book, by the way, here's a plug, is amazing. And the lady who did the audiobook reading did this very kind of like upper class English layabout voice for Tal, where he's kind of like very drawly and very I can't quite do it, although my accent is actually quite close to that. Which is like a very specific type, which I think is fairly perfect for him. But again, it delights me that there are a range of options for Tal there. A character who divides opinion, I will say.
He was one of my favorite characters, I think.
Yeah, mine too, I have to admit.
Was he your favorite, or did you have other favorite characters?
I mean, they were all my favorite. I think Arana is probably my complete favorite, because whenever I get to write a scene with her in, this may mean nothing to people who haven't read the book, Arana is kind of a secondary villain. She's kind of, I guess that, well, she does her own thing. She's not on anyone's side. But whenever she would be in a scene, nothing boring would happen because she wouldn't put up with it. And the plot would definitely get advanced because she was not going to be there standing around not letting things happen. So that was very useful to me as a writer, just kind of, because a lot of times you can get stuck in writing a scene where everyone just kind of stands around in a room and it's like, for God's sake, get on with it.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that you also avoided like people standing around is like there are a lot of time jumps, time skips where like it's like 5 years pass, or 3 months or something like that. Did you have an idea in your mind for what was happening in that time off screen, or how did you decide what to leave out?
I kind of did. A lot of times I would just do a time skip because I couldn't be bothered to think of what happened in that. Actually, that's not true. No, they were all for specific reasons. But it was more kind of, there has to be a kind of, because Csorwe is 14 when the book starts, and then she kind of has to be a grown-up for all the stuff that happens. I knew that she had to do a lot of training in the sword and training in other skills I don't know anything about. And I thought about learning a lot about swords, and then I thought, I'm too lazy for this. But I needed the reader to believe and understand that she was very good at swords. So I thought, okay, well, we have a time skip where she learns about how to do swords, and then we can take it as read that she's an adept swordswoman. And then similarly, the kind of the time skip kind of after she's kind of fully trained, but then we kind of have to skip ahead a bit to the actual like meat of the story, was again because I guess to set up the central conflict of the book, which is that she's sort of having conflicted feelings about her employment. She needs to have been in that employment for a certain amount of time in order to make that happen. But I really like time skips in books because I think it gives you a latitude to tell a more expansive story. Obviously, there is something very impressive when an author can do, all these amazing events kind of happen in a very satisfying way in a single day, and it's kind of like, well, this is so compressed. I really admire that. But I also quite like the sense of being able to have the whole span of a person's history, or even of like world history. Like in the werewolf book that I was talking about, there was like a 1,000-year time skip back and forth, so you get kind of like ancient history events and modern day events, and that's one of the things that I enjoy about the fantasy genre, I think, is that you can kind of believably set up a thing where events of the distant past or future are kind of thematically tied in, or even causatively tied in. It's fun.
That's true. Yeah. And sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. It was something about with Csorwe, it makes it, leaving those time jumps out, it gives you more room to do that character development of the Seth, what's his name? The main guy.
Oh, Belfandros? The bad guy. I mean, is he bad? Who knows?
Right. Seth and I.
Yeah.
Of him like indoctrinating her as his like child soldier right hand. Like you can, if you did that all in like 3 days, it's like it wouldn't be as believable, but you give it the room to like take root there.
I think giving stuff some room to breathe can also mean that you can do things in a more maybe restrained way, because I mean, obviously you could have a scene where you could have a storyline where someone has this mentor who's initially very nice to them and then turns out to be maybe not have their best interests at heart all the time, but it would kind of have to be portrayed in a more extreme way. Whereas I kind of wanted his like hold on her and, like you said, indoctrination to kind of play out more on an emotional level rather than through any kind of like extreme like curses or what have you.
Yeah, it was very subtle, and you had the same thing with Tal and Seth and I that we got to see too. How did you decide which characters would have the point of view for that chapter when there were multiple point of view characters?
So when I first started writing it, I wanted it to just be Csorwe all the way through and not have any other perspective, because the project I've been working on before, the Strange Werewolf book, had way too many point of view characters, and it was really kind of hard to manage, and also kind of hard to sometimes distinguish the voice in an interesting way. So I was very determined it was just going to be her. And then Tal was there. And I sort of realized that actually certain sequences were not going to work without letting him elbow in a bit. And then also Arana, because it's always kind of fun to have she's not exactly a villain, but to have a villain perspective, so that you have some tension where you kind of are like, oh no, something's going on in the background that the heroes don't know about yet. But the characters who I really did not want to have point of view in that book were Sathanai and Shithamili, because I feel like as the kind of mysterious mentor and love interest, they have to be opaque, like, because so much of the book is about Csorwe as the main character kind of puzzling out what she thinks about them, what she feels about them. You can't really, it's kind of feels like cheating to know as a reader what they think and feel about her. But they get their say in later books. So. Yeah, in fact, sorry, go on.
No, that makes sense. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, most of book 2 is from Tal and Shithamili's points of view. So there's a little, Csorwe kind of gets a little point of view, but it's mostly about them, because I really liked them writing the first book, and I was like, well, their time to shine.
Right. That's interesting. Is there anything else that you can tell us about book 2?
I don't really know. I mean, obviously, I know everything that happens, but I feel like if I tell you the ending, then I will get in trouble, and also I'll spoil it for a lot of people. What can I tell you about book 2? It's quite different from the first one, because I wanted to do something that did not feel like a rehash of the same thing again. It's quite different, both in terms of kind of obviously the characters who are in it, but also the tone and scale of it. Like, it's another one that plays out over quite a long time period, so there are various time skips in it and so on. It's kind of the future after what happens in Unspoken Name. Originally it was supposed to take place 20 years afterwards, and I think I may have said that in a few places, and that's kind of, we've dialed that back a little bit. yeah, there's nothing I can really say without spoiling the end of the first book a lot. But there are some old characters, there are some new characters, new things happen, more snakes, more murders. Tells there a lot, if that helps people to think they might want to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping there would be more snakes. I felt like we needed to return to them.
Well, this is an example of how kind of ad hoc the world building sometimes is, in that the snake world did not really show up until I think the last round of edits on Unspoken Name, because they had to go on this field trip. So if you haven't read the book, there is a bit in the book where Csorwe and the wizard go on a field trip sort of thing to a world which I have referred to as Snake Pompeii. So it's like the ruins of this civilization that was all giant snakes. And so there are lots of snake bodies lying around, and also these kind of enormous snake buildings and so on. And there's kind of the ruins of this snake civilization that no longer exists. And then the second book, it was like, I know I wrote about the ruins of the snake civilization that no longer exists, but what if it did still exist? So there's a lot more snakes. Although I had to come up with some cunning workarounds, because actually blocking a scene with a giant snake in it is very difficult, because you can't fit them into any space. They can't come into someone's house and talk to them. So you have to come up with some clever tricks to be able to actually do anything with them.
That's interesting. So you mentioned that you're working on book 3 currently.
Yes.
How many books in the series are you planning to have?
It's always either the same number that there are, including the one that I'm working on, or maybe one more than that. I'm not very good at planning far in advance. Or I could come up with a massive series arc and kind of, the ultimate destiny and loads of prophecies and stuff. And then after about 5 minutes, I'd be like, I don't want to do that though. At the moment, the one that I'm currently working on, the third one, is the only one that I have planned in detail, but I have lots of ideas for this world and this setting. And kind of every time I have to invent a new character, it's kind of like, but what's their story? So, I feel like if I had to go back and write the secret backstory of Tal's older brother, who kind of sucks, who doesn't show up until the second book, I could write about his adventures. Well, maybe not actually. He just works in an office, but actually, I worked in an office, and I feel like I had some adventures. So who knows? But yeah.
Okay. Cool. So you don't have an idea of how the series will end. It's just one book at a time.
Basically, yeah. I mean, there are definitely some threads kind of weaving from one to the other. I will say the third book does not happen chronologically after the second book, so it's more kind of, it's not, there's not I don't have a 7-book plan and this is how everything's going to come together at the end. It's more just kind of this somewhat expanding galaxy of different characters and worlds and dynamics that I'm interested in, which may be a bit contrarian of me, but yes.
I like that. And people always say write what you want to read, right? So is this the sort of thing that you look for in other books as well?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, having said that, during the lockdown, I have been reading almost exclusively Agatha Christie novels. So I'm not writing one of those because no one else can. But yeah, I guess so. Kind of, I started working on it because at the time, I mean, this was in the early 2010s, and things thankfully have really changed a lot. I didn't see a lot of adult fantasy with female protagonists, with the kind of LGBT representation that I was keen to see, with kind of that were not romances, basically. I mean, there is a romance plotline in the book, but that's not the focus really. And also had a lot of weird stuff, because I'm sure you could find all of these things, but essential to me is the weird stuff. For instance, I love snakes, skeletons have to be there, tombs, and so on. So I sort of thought, well, if I would like to have all of these things, I suppose I'll just have to do it myself. And no, but very pleasantly, there are now a lot of books that have all of those things and weird stuff. So yeah, it's good.
That's true. It's a rapidly expanding subgenre, which is great. Yeah. And your book, I think in a lot of things, too, especially before now in the past years, like you were saying, those characters were sidelined, or there would be one queer character, but your book has at least 5, so that's fantastic.
The secret is they all are. Well, it's kind of, I didn't really want to do a book with I didn't want to do a fantasy setting with the same kind of like model of sexuality or sexual orientation that currently exists in our world. So initially when I started writing it, there were kind of like, I sort of felt like there had to be like a coming out storyline, or there had to be like she's nearly conflict had to be that her society was really homophobic or something. And then I was kind of like, no, this sucks. I don't want to write about this. So I just didn't. I was like, it's not a thing. It's fine. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantasy world. There doesn't have to be homophobia.
Yeah, for sure. Well, also on kind of, even in editing, my editor was kind of like, a lot of the guards in this book seem to be men only, and it doesn't have to be like that. And I was like, you know what, this is true. I had some unquestioned assumptions. So that was very helpful and kind of nice to rethink about, like, actually I can do whatever I want. Like, it's my book. So yeah, that was good.
That's awesome. So what books have you been reading that you think people who like this book would also like?
Oh, it's a good question. Because I like a lot of different kinds of books. Like, as I mentioned, I have been reading a lot of detective mysteries, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend to someone who liked this book, because it's in no sense a detective mystery. But in terms of fantasy books that I've been reading and enjoying, so excuse me, I recently read a book called Star Eater by Kirsten, which I really loved, but sadly it's not coming out until next year. So keep an eye out for that one. It's amazing. It has like everything that I said in terms of like fantasy with a lot of women. I think almost every character in it is a conniving woman, and they're all great. And loads of weird stuff, loads of cannibalism, and just a kind of very interesting kind of, I like fantasy worlds that are kind of not even so much kind of like, here's an alternative country that kind of works in a way that we understand countries to work or whatever, but that have a kind of, have a, like a bizarre high concept geography or whatever. And this Star Eater is set in a kind of floating island. And they have a problem where sometimes people, for plot reasons that I won't spoil you for, will turn into kind of like ravening undead horrors, and then the only thing they can do with them is just throw them off the edge. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, sadly not out until next year. What else have I enjoyed recently? I really liked The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water, which is a novella, but it's very fun and very kind of, saying cute kind of gives the wrong impression, but it's kind of heartwarming in a way that's not twee. It's about this nun who ends up joining up with a group of outlaws. Maybe they're bandits, maybe they have some other secret purpose. And about her relationship with the group and also with certain individuals in the group. And kind of, it's, you get the sense of this long, very complicated conflict that's played out over years and years, but just through the window of these few characters kind of making their way in that world. And I think that she really well balances the kind of the like personality and humor of everyone with also the sense of kind of like this intriguing world around them. So I'm kind of hoping that she'll do more books set in that world. What else? Oh, I really loved The Changeling by Viktor Lavalle, which is very different. That's it's kind of a spoiler to say what genre it is, but it's kind of urban fantasy, I guess, or urban fantasy horror. It's about a man who's a used book dealer whose wife commits an incomprehensible crime, or does she? It's great. I'm not normally always wild about fantasy that's kind of set in the real world, as it were, because I don't know, I've just read a lot of takes on it that I didn't really enjoy. So I kind of picked this one up thinking, I'm not sure this is going to be for me, but I really enjoyed his novella, The Ballad of Black Tom. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And then I picked it up and I just couldn't stop reading it for about 2 days. It's really amazing. Also quite dark and horrifying. So like tread lightly. But yeah.
Yeah, that's actually the book that I read just before this one.
Oh, really? Oh, I loved it. Well, I won't go into too many details, but I loved the reveal of the supernatural entity in it. It was very good. Extremely cool. But yeah, no, everyone should just read it, and the less you know about it, the better, to be honest.
That's true. Yeah, we did that for our sci-fi book club here for October.
Oh, cool. It's so great. It's genius. Yes.
That was actually September. Sorry, October is hitting the 9th. But.
Cool. Also great. An excellent book.
Yeah, those sound like a lot of great recommendations. The Changeling's the only one of those that I've read. But I mean, since some of them aren't even out yet, we'll have our chances
Sorry
later.
about that.
No, it's good. You can pre-order them with links in the comments if you want. And it sounds like a really great thing to add to your TBR list. I'm adding it to mine. So what are some other things that you read growing up? Like what got you interested in writing?
What got me interested in writing? I mean, I was thinking about this recently, actually. I've always really enjoyed reading. Probably too much. I just used to sneak off to the school library at break time instead of talking to other children. But I don't know if that's kind of necessarily been a direct influence on writing. Like, obviously, I really loved reading like the Redwall books, Animorphs, which I had to read secretly because I thought that my parents would laugh at me because they had silly covers. So I would read those secretly at the school library and not take them home. I don't think they would have done. I don't quite know why I had this idea. I don't know why they would have been like that. But anyway, it seemed very real to me when I was like 12. But the kind of the writing was always about sort of like feeling like I had a boring life and I wanted to kind of come up with some interesting adventures, or that I would kind of I would read a book about some kind of exciting world, and it wouldn't be so much kind of I want to write a book. It would be like, how can I make this mine? How can I steal this for myself? And it's one of the things that was very inspiring in that way was the X-Men animated series, which I don't remember kind of watching to the point that I kind of had an attachment to any particular character or plotline. I was just so taken with this idea of kind of like these normal people who kind of had some like secret inborn talent, but it was also like often very horrifying and like made them very monstrous. And I was very into that, so I would just kind of spend a lot of time coming with like my own mutant characters. And I obviously I had my one who was like my character, and she had both fire and ice powers, of course. So yeah, it was just kind of what got me into writing, I guess, was just this kind of like very like acquisitive feeling of like, yes, I want these things for myself, and the idea that someone might actually like read my work came along later. I don't know if that's true for a lot of people, or if I'm just like to have my treasures. But yeah.
Yeah, and I see the like children's soldiers of Animorphs, you know.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. The other series that I really, really loved was the Artemis Fowl books, which I think that they're kind of I was thinking about this and trying to think if there was any possible commonality with my book. But actually, I was remembering about how he has his butler. So Artemis Fowl is this middle grade series about like a boy genius who discovers fairies, but he's also a boy genius and involved in crime. So those things kind of come together in an interesting way. But he has his butler who's extremely loyal to him and kind of follows him everywhere. And I think that's kind of probably where I got my interest in kind of like, yes, the extremely loyal sidekick, and have been kind of interested in what's going on in their head for a long time.
And you've got kind of the gray morality that like Artemis Fowl has. It's kind of there.
That's true. Well, and I remember those books being really funny, although I think probably looking back, it was a lot of jokes about a centaur and his bodily functions that happened a lot.
What was the guy who the mulch Diggums?
Yes, him who just like used to
I'm not going to describe it.
It's pretty horrible. So that's not. I mean, that was obviously very funny to me as a child. But that kind of like irreverence of it, I think, I liked that, and I like the idea of, because people in real life like do tell a lot of jokes or have a funny way with each other, or and have a sense of humor about things, so it doesn't feel realistic to write a world where people are not like that.
Right. Yeah, like so many high fantasy books, the characters also feel like high, like above everything. And I think your characters feel like down to earth and like you make jokes and like relate to each other on a less I don't know, hoity-toity level than Changeling. So I enjoyed that. Did you ever read the book Hexwood?
Yes, I did. I love Hexwood. Damn, that's an extremely good book. Yes, I read Hexwood when I was like, I read all of the Diana Wynne Joneses when I was little, and I think that one kind of passed me by because it was too complicated. And then I reread it when I was about 16, and I thought, oh my god, I'm going to write a book like this. Hexwood is, if people haven't read it, it's a book which ostensibly is about the kind of classic middle grade setup of like, oh, I'm a girl who's ill at home from school, and I kind of observe the weird things that are going on around in my neighborhood, and maybe something mysterious is happening in the mysterious wood at the end of the road. And then I won't spoil it for you, but it's completely, it's more than anything you can possibly imagine. By the end of the book, it has this kind of like multi-dimensional interstellar scale, and kind of no character is who you think they are, and someone turns into a dragon. It's absolutely incredible. And I don't know why I read it when I was a teenager, and I was like, yeah, I could do this. Like, no one can do this. No one else can pull this off.
Yeah, when you were mentioning when you were sick and were like sitting behind the scenes and watching things, I was thinking about Hexwood during that. I love
it. But that has an assassin with a very, very sad backstory in it as well. So I think he was probably quite formative for me.
That's true. Yeah,
and has been very cruelly raised by evil masters to further their terrible schemes. Yeah, Hexwood was totally an influence which I hadn't really thought.
I always describe Hexwood as a mix between Sense8 and the movie Jupiter's Ascending.
Yeah,
but like way better.
It does have a very Jupiter Ascending vibe, which is a movie that I love. Sometimes when I have the soundtrack, and sometimes when I'm trying to think what should happen in my book, and I'm kind of like, oh, all of these ideas are really boring. And so I listen to the Jupiter Ascending soundtrack, and it's not like I want to do Jupiter Ascending things, but it's kind of like I want this sense of like really very self-indulgent drama, and like anything can happen.
Yeah, Jupiter Ascending is definitely like fun. Like it leans into
yeah. Oh yeah, I mean like Sean Bean is a bee man, and Channing Tatum is a werewolf man who did have wings, but then they were taken away from him. It's amazing. That's what I aspire to all the time. And there's the scene where Mila Kunis has to get married in a huge chapel full of robots for no reason, but she does get to wear an enormous wedding dress covered in Swarovski crystals. Like that's all that you need.
And she flirts with Channing Tatum by saying, "I like dogs."
Yeah. Such a film. Also featuring Eddie Redmayne's best ever performance on screen, I would say.
Him as a villain was something, yes.
Yeah. But that's what I want from a villain always. It's just like very again, if you haven't seen the movie, Eddie Redmayne appears in this film as this like very hoarse-voiced space aristocrat who appears most of the time like wearing no shirt but with an enormous cape covered in crystals, and all of his lines are kind of like wheezed very operatically,
or shouted.
Often while he's like sitting on a throne in front of a planet that's like exploding. I can't remember what happens in the film. It's just a series of images that go through my mind now. I'm sure there was a plot about becoming immortal or something, but I don't know what it was.
Right. Yeah, it's a very opulent villain. Yeah.
Yes, the dream.
Yes. But yeah, I think there are like hints of all of these things hidden in your book. So people should definitely check it out and buy it from our bookstore.
Yes, do.
Or their local indie bookstore, wherever you're located. Like if you're in the UK, maybe buy it from the store in the UK.
This is true.
Yes. But unless anybody has any questions, I think we could go ahead and wrap up. We've covered a lot of good ground, I think. I really enjoyed your book. We would love to have you back when your second book comes out in next June.
For sure. No, I'd love to.
That would be cool.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
One day when this whole unpleasantness is over, I will be able to come to Georgia and visit you for real. I miss going to the bookshop. I have not for many months.
In a few years, when Georgia gets itself under control, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that would be nice.
But in the meantime, we've got other virtual events that people can also check out. We're doing an author event with Roshni Chokshi next Wednesday. That's a private event people can RSVP to. We're talking with Jill Criswell that Thursday. She's this author. I think Alexandra Rowland and Jen Lyons, we're going to talk to you October 24th. So lots of great fantasy events coming up. And if anybody's interested in our Sci-Fi Fantasy Book Club, where we read The Changeling and we'll be reading Getting the Ninth and Doors of January in January, then they should join us there too. Yes. But everybody have a good day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.